Hello everyone, welcome to another anatomy video. I hope you're all having a great day, and today is the first video that I'm making that's covering muscles, more specifically muscles found in the superior limb. Now, I'm sure you guys have heard that the muscle chapters are very difficult. Um, Students usually have a hard time when it comes to learning the muscle groups and all the things that go with it. But I just want to reassure you that you have been preparing yourselves for the muscle chapters for these past couple weeks, and I'll explain why in a second. When dealing with muscles, first we need to know what type of muscles that we're going to be learning. Muscles come in three different groups. The first group being cardiac muscle tissue. And those are muscles found within the heart. We have smooth muscle tissue. Which are found within vessels and a lot of vascular structures. And the last group of muscles are skeletal muscles. And these are the muscles that are responsible for movement, for locomotion, for, supporting our weight, all those different things. And this is the main group that we're going to be focusing on today. Skeletal muscles, like I mentioned, are responsible for movement throughout the body. Now, when I was a kid, I remember going over to my cousin's house or to my grandma or grandpa's house, and they would say, "Wow, you've grown so much. Go ahead and flex your muscles for me." And, I would flex my biceps, and they would say how strong I was. However, in anatomy, you realize that muscles don't flex. Muscles are either contracting or relaxing. What flexes are joints. Joints are responsible for all these different actions. You can flex the elbow joint, you can extend the elbow joint, you can abduct or adduct. Those are all found within joints. So when we start going over the actions of muscles, we can't say that the muscles are flexing or extending. Rather, the joints are. So that's going to be important when learning about muscles. The first thing we need to know is the origin. Now, you may think, what the heck is an origin? The origin is where the muscle originates. It is where the least amount of movement occurs within the muscle. So I'm going to write that down. It's usually found on the proximal end of a bony structure. And again, this is where the muscle starts or originates. The second thing we need to know when discussing skeletal muscles is where it inserts. The insertion point is where there's the most amount of movement. It's going to be distal to the origin of the muscle. And again, this is the insertion of the muscle, where it ends. And the last thing that we need to know when learning about skeletal muscles is their action. What happens when the muscle contracts? What happens when the muscle relaxes? You may be looking at this and be thinking, oh my gosh, I have to learn the origin, the insertion, the action of every skeletal muscle that we learn. And yes, you do. But here's the thing, you've been preparing yourselves when you've been learning bony structures. And I'm going to show you why right now. Right here is the first muscle that we're going to learn. The muscle shown here on the right side of the screen is called the supraspinatus muscle. When I put M dot, that just means muscle, okay? Now, we have to now identify the origin and the insertion of this muscle. So I'm going to go ahead and look at it, and I'm going to think, okay, I see that it's going to start at the scapula, and it's going to end on the humerus. And I'm sure there's more movement occurring over by the shoulder joint than it is over on the proximal end of the scapula. So I'm going to go ahead and say that over here is where the origin's going to be. And then down here, in this blue area, this is where the insertion's going to be. Because when this muscle contracts, I'm sure the humerus is going to move rather than the scapula. Now let's think. This is called the supraspinatus muscle. So it must be residing here, in the supraspinous fossa of the scapula. And that's actually the origin of it. It makes sense that this is the origin of the supraspinatus muscle, since it sits in this bony landmark in the supraspinous fossa of the scapula. So this has got to be the origin of this muscle, which, if you guys think about it, you learned this bony landmark weeks ago. So it should be quite easy. So you should realize now that all the bony landmarks that we were learning, most of them are origins and insertions for muscles. So this is what I do. Just like what we did just barely in discovering the origin of the supraspinatus muscle, I look around and think, okay, what bony landmarks do I know that this muscle seems to be attached to? In this case, the supraspinatus muscle, the name of it tells us the origin, which is really helpful. But now we got to think, what is the insertion point of this muscle? Well, we already decided that the most amount of movement occurs down by the humerus, and it occurs over here. It seems to be attaching right here, where this large bump is. Now, what was the name of this large bump? If we remember correctly, this is going to be the greater tubercle of the humerus. And that's the insertion point of the supraspinatus muscle. It wasn't that hard at all. You already discovered the origin and insertion of your first muscle. The origin, the supraspinous fossa of the scapula, and the insertion is the greater tubercle of the humerus. Like I said, we learned all these bony landmarks already. You just gotta look at the muscle. Okay, it's starting up here, and it seems to be inserting down here on this large bump. And I know the name of this large bump. This is the greater tubercle of the humerus. So this has gotta be the insertion for it. Now we gotta discover the action. Now you gotta visualize what's going to occur if the supraspinatus muscle contracts. Well, contraction is kind of like an elastic rubber band, right? If I had a rubber band spanning from here and it went all the way down to the greater tubercle of the humerus, and it contracted like a muscle would, how would the humerus move in this instance? Well, if we think about it, the superior limb is going to lift up at the shoulder joint. And if it's going to lift up, that's going to be called abduction. So our action for this muscle is that it abducts the superior limb at the shoulder joint. And that's it. You've learned everything you need to know for the supraspinatus muscle. We found the origin. That was quite easy because it's in the name, the supraspinous fossa of the scapula. Plus, it's quite easy to see that it just resides in this depression. And then we saw that it inserts into the greater tubercle of the humerus, and that when the muscle contracts, it's got to lift up that arm and abduct the superior limb at the shoulder joint. Remember, we can't flex, extend, abduct, or adduct a region or a bone or a muscle. We got to do this out of certain joints. In this case, we're adducting the superior limb at the shoulder joint. Okay? Awesome. Now that we've done our first muscle, let's go ahead and do the same amount of steps with the second muscle. Now, the muscle you see here is called the infraspinatus muscle. So let's go ahead and break it down like we did with the first muscle. The infraspinatus muscle seems to be residing in the depression just inferior to the spine of the scapula, in this region right here. Now, what was the name of this depression right here? Well, if I remember correctly, this was called the infraspinatus fossa of the scapula. So the origin is just going to be that. Sweet, now that we got that out of the way, let's go ahead and see if we can find the insertion point. Looking at the muscle, it seems to be inserting right around here, right on this large bump again. So on the left image, it would be just about right here. What was the name of this bony landmark again? It was the greater tubercle of the humerus. Awesome! Again, this was super easy. We just looked at the origin and the insertion point of the muscle, and we just identified the bony landmarks that we've already learned there. Now we got to discover the action. Okay, so what is the action of this muscle? If this muscle contracts, what would it do to the surrounding joints? Well, it's probably going to pull back the humerus, which is going to extend the shoulder joint. And as it's doing, it's probably going to rotate the brachium externally. And that's exactly what the action is. It's going to extend the shoulder joint. And it's also going to rotate the brachium externally. You can also say rotate the brachium laterally. And all that means it's going to go ahead and just rotate in this direction. So if you look at the muscle, if it contracts, it's going to slightly rotate it laterally. It's going to twist this whole region to the lateral aspect. So yes, it's going to extend the shoulder joint because it's going to contract this way, which is going to extend the shoulder joint, and it's also going to twist this whole region and rotate the brachium laterally or externally. Awesome, and that's all you need to know for the infraspinatus muscle. Now let's go ahead and move on to the next one. Alright, now the name of this muscle right here is the subscapularis muscle. Now let's think, where does it seem to be residing? What do you think the origin is? It's found in this depression right here on the anterior surface of the scapula. So what was this depression called again? Well, it was called the subscapular fossa of the scapula. Okay, sweet. Now that we got the origin, let's go ahead and look for the insertion. Okay, it seems to be coming over and attaching right here. Now over here on the left image, it would be just about right here. Okay, now what is this little bump called again? It's called the lesser tubercle of the humerus. Sweet. All right, we got two out of the three things that we need to know for this muscle. Now let's discover the action for it. Okay, so when the subscapularis muscle contracts, it looks like it's going to bring the humerus in this direction. Looks like it's kind of going to twist it or rotate it towards the scapula. So that action's going to look like it's going to be rotating this brachium, which is the region. It's going to rotate the brachium medially. Okay, and those are all the things that we need to know for the subscapularis muscle. Origin, subscapular fossa scapula. Insertion, lesser tubercle of the humerus. And it's going to rotate the brachium medially. I hope you guys can visualize how that works when this muscle is contracting. Since it's inserted into the lesser tubercle of the humerus, it's going to cause this twisting motion medially or internally towards the scapula, which is going to be rotation of the brachium medially. Awesome, let's go ahead and move on. Sweet, we have a small muscle here, and this is going to be called the Teres Minor muscle. Now let's see where it's originating from. It looks like it's originating from kind of this region right here. So let's go to the left image. It's going to be just about right here on this area. So what is the landmark that we learned on the scapula that would describe where this is originating from? Well, this appears to be along this border right here. And I know that this border is called the lateral border of the scapula, so that's got to be the origin of this muscle. Awesome. Now let's go ahead and look for the insertion point of the muscle. Okay, the muscle seems to be inserting again into this large bump found on the humerus on the left image. It's just right about here. And again, that looks like the greater tubercle of the humerus. Now, what would the action be for this muscle? Well, if this muscle contracts, it looks like it would be pulling this entire limb towards the scapula at the shoulder joint. So I bet it's going to be adduct superior limb at shoulder joint. But I think it does something else. What else do you think it could do? Well, if we look at it a little closely, it's again going to rotate this region, this brachium, laterally. Since it's originating at the lateral border of the scapula and inserting to the greater tubercle, it's kind of going to twist this. It's going to twist this region, this brachium, externally. So this is also going to rotate brachium laterally. Awesome. That's all we need to know for the teres minor muscle. Now we got another muscle here, and this muscle's name is teres major muscle. Alright, now let's look for the origin of it. It seems to be at this bottom lower portion of the scapula. So if we go over to the far left image of the three images, it seems to be coming off from right around here, does it not? So what is the bony landmark that we learned? Well, we learned that this tip down here is going to be called the inferior angle of the scapula. So I'm going to guess that that's what the origin's going to be, which it is. This is the origin of the teres major muscle. I hope me going through this process for every muscle isn't annoying. I just want you guys to see my thought process as I identify the origins and insertions and the actions of all these muscles, hoping that you guys can see it's really not that hard. Like I said, you guys have been learning all these bony landmarks and you've been learning the actions of the joints as well. So all these characteristics for these muscles should come fairly easy to you. Of course, it's going to take practice breaking down all these things. But again, I want you guys to see that it's not that difficult and you shouldn't be nervous or stress out too much about learning these muscle groups. Okay? So yes, this is the origin for this muscle is the inferior angle of the scapula. Now if we look at the muscle, it actually goes from the posterior aspect and loops around into the anterior aspect of the humerus. And it inserts right here. Now I'm thinking, okay, it's not on the lesser tubercle of the humerus because the lesser tubercle of the humerus is right here. And it's not in the intertubercular groove of the humerus, which is found right here. It's kind of found right next to the intertubercular groove. So if there's not a landmark that the muscle is inserting to, I'm going to have to describe its location where it is inserting. So if I'm looking at this, I'm thinking, okay, it's by the intertubercular groove and it's by this border right here. So I'm going to say, okay, it's located right here on the border of the intertubercular groove of the humerus. It's not in it, it's not on it, it's right next to it. And so I'm going to say that the insertion point is the medial border of the intertubercular groove of the humerus. Okay, cool. Now that we got the origin insertion, let's go ahead and find the action. So if the teres major muscle contracts, it looks like it's gonna pull the whole limb towards the scapula. So we know what that's called. We know that when it's being pulled towards the main body, that's called adduction. So this is going to be adduct superior limb at the shoulder joint. What else can it do? It looks like it's also going to be able to extend the shoulder joint. And I bet it's also going to twist the brachium. Because if you see here, it's starting from the inferior angle of the scapula and inserting to the medial border of the intertubercular groove of the humerus. And it's going to kind of rotate this brachium in this direction, which is going to be a medial rotation. So I'm going to go ahead and write that up here since I'm running out of room. It's going to rotate brachium medially. And those are all the characteristics that we need to know for the teres major muscle. Right here we see a muscle that's by far the largest muscle that surrounds the shoulder joint, and this muscle is called the deltoideus muscle. Now the deltoideus muscle looks like it's spanning across a lot of different landmarks that we already know. So let's go ahead and break this down. On the right image, I'm going to just go ahead and kind of trace around the area that it seems to be originating from. It goes down over here, across here, and down here. So what are all these different landmarks? Well, if we go to the left image now and redraw what I already drew, it seems to be originating from these different landmarks right here. So what are these landmarks? Well, let's start on the clavicle. This landmark we learned is called the acromial extremity of the clavicle. So that's one origin. And it also seems to be going over this landmark that we learned right here. And that was the acromion of the scapula. And the last landmark that it seems to be going over is this one right here. If we remember, this is the spine of the scapula. Awesome, now let's find the insertion. So if we look down here, the deltoideus muscle seems to be inserting right around here on the humerus. So on the left image, we see this roughened patch found on the lateral part of the body of the humerus. Now what was that roughened patch called again? Well, if we remember, it was called the deltoid tuberosity. Now it kind of makes sense why it's called the deltoid tuberosity of the humerus, right? Because the deltoideus muscle inserts into that landmark. So the landmark actually tells us the insertion point of that muscle, deltoid tuberosity of the humerus. Now, what's the action? Well, the deltoideus muscle is pretty large, and it covers a large portion of the shoulder joint. We can see that if it contracts from here to here, it's going to flex the shoulder joint. And if it contracts from here to here, it's going to extend the shoulder joint. But at the same time, if it contracts around here in this middle portion, it's going to pull up the superior limb and abduct it at the shoulder joint. And also, if we manipulate it the right way, it's probably going to twist the brachium medially and laterally as well. So I just identified all the actions for you, but I hope you saw the thought process that I had in breaking it down. The deltoideus muscle is one of the few muscles that has so many actions. The only thing it doesn't do is adduct the superior limb at the shoulder joint. It can only abduct. So let me again write down all the different actions that the deltoideus muscle does. I said it abducts, superior limb at the shoulder joint, which was indicated here. It's going to pull up on the deltoid tuberosity of the humerus and lift up the superior limb at the shoulder joint, so it's going to abduct it. So that's the first action. And I also said it extends and flexes the shoulder joint. Which was indicated here and here. And it also rotates the brachium medially and laterally. So those are all the different things we need to know for the deltoideus muscle. Again, hope you saw that it was quite easy to identify the origin and insertion for this muscle, and that the action for this muscle, it's pretty much everything except adduct the superior limb at the shoulder joint. Now this is the last muscle that we're going to learn in this video, and the name of this muscle is the Coracobrachialis muscle. Now the origin seems to be coming from up here on this part of the scapula, which is over here on the left image. And what is the name of this projection coming out? Well, that was the coracoid process of the scapula. Which makes sense why it's called the coracobrachialis muscle. Coraco being derived from the coracoid process of the scapula, and brachialis because it's inserting into the brachium. So it seems to be inserting right around here on this part of the body of the humerus, which is down here on the left image. Now I'm trying to think, is there any landmarks that we know that are found on this portion of the body of the humerus? And it doesn't seem like we learned anything here, so we're going to have to describe the insertion point for this muscle. It seems to be inserting into the medial aspect of the body of the humerus compared to the lateral aspect, right? The lateral is over here, this has got to be the medial, so the insertion point is the medial aspect of the body of the humerus. Now, what is the action got to be here? So we know it's going to cause an action to the shoulder joint because this is the only joint it's crossing over. So what action could it be doing? Well, if this contracted, the muscle contracted right here, it would definitely flex the shoulder joint. It would also pull the superior limb closer to the trunk or towards the body, right? So it's definitely going to adduct the superior limb at the shoulder joint. And there you have it, guys. You learned your first group of muscles and all their origins, insertions, and actions. I know I kind of took my time in discussing my thought process on how I remember all the origins and insertions and the actions of each muscle. But I just want to show you that it's not a matter of memorizing in flashcards and spending hours and hours of memorization. I mean, you can do that, and I'm sure you can be successful in your studies that way. But if you just look at the muscle and see where it's coming off of and think, okay, what is the bony landmark that we learned for these bones? And are the muscles coming off of there? It really helps and facilitates learning all the origins and insertions for all these different muscle groups. So again, I hope this video was helpful and that your studies go well. Take care.